Hello everybody, and welcome to part 20 of the Star Wars Legends Chronological Review Series. Hope you guys enjoy the brand new setup we hear today as we cover the next volume of Knights of the Old Republic comics titled Flashpoint, which contains 6 issues that continue the adventures of Renegade ex-Padawan Zane Carrick as he and his crew begin to get mixed up in the conflict between the Jedi Knights and the Mandalorians, and we're also going to catch up with some unexpected characters, both new and old. So without further ado, let's jump straight into it. We return to the story with issue 7 at the planet Vanquo, a mining world on the edge of both Republic and Mandalorian space. We see some residents being real a-holes to a war refugee who's begging for food when Jedi Master Cornelia contacts the base, telling them that the Mandalorians have begun to invade the planet. The previously smug miners evacuate the base in a panic, but we find out that cheeky little Zane Carrick and his merry band orchestrated the entire thing, with Jarael masquerading as a Jedi Master using Zane's lightsaber, convincing the miners that their sham Jedi hologram was real with a bit of persuasion through the Force. We also find out that LB, the loader droid that short-circuited itself to avoid comprehending its own apparent death at the hands of the Jedi, is still with the crew, but can only be convinced to do anything if it believes that its old master Lucian is still around and calling the shots. Also, Jarael has really been enjoying playing Jedi with Zane's lightsaber. Before the crew can secure more food and supplies from the abandoned base though, the Mandalorians suddenly attack the planet, for real this time. The Mandalorians mistake Jarael for a Jedi and dogpile on her before the others can really do anything about it, and though Camper can't bear to leave her, Zane commands LB to take Camper back to the last resort. But, under a commander named Rollo, the Mandalorians press their attack and manage to commandeer the ship. Speeding into issue 8, we get a brief glance at an interaction between a Mandalorian soldier and the Mandalorian leader, Mandalore the Ultimate. We see that with Vanquo, vanquished, the path for the Mandalorians to invade Taris is clear. The soldier tells Mandalore that they've lost contact with Commander Rollo, who led the assault, to which Mandalore replies that for Rollo's sake, he better hope he's dead. Zane, Griff, Camper, and LB fight back for their ship, capturing a Mandalorian soldier, while Jarael tries to convince her Mandalorian captors that she isn't really a Jedi. Now reclaimed, the last resort leaves orbit and jumps into hyperspace right past the Republic fleet, and the Republic is able to identify the ship as Zane Carrick's ship, and they assume him to be a Mandalorian operative. So it seems like Zane isn't going to be catching a break from the Republic anytime soon. It turns out that the captured Mandalorian aboard the last resort is Commander Rollo, who gives Zane and company the lowdown on the Mandalorian war effort and also opens up about his diminishing morale in a warrior culture where deserting is about the worst crime imaginable. Rollo explains that since a Jedi student, he's not sure who, killed his entire graduating class on Taris, the Jedi have all left the planet, causing it to become basically the biggest shithole in the galaxy instead of just the biggest shithole this side of the Hydian Way. Taris becoming vulnerable to Mandalorian attack made it key to the war's official start, and Rollo hopes he can find answers there. The Last Resort's course is currently set for Flashpoint, a station on a planet very close to its sun that keeps Jedi prisoners who are being experimented on by the Mandalorian scientist Demigol. The Last Resort is barely making light speed, giving Zane a few hours before their arrival to hatch a plan to rescue Jarael. On Flashpoint, Jarael is approached to begin experimentation, but none other than Zane's old Jedi friend Squint appears and volunteers to take her place. Skipping an issue to number 10, you'll see why in a bit, don't worry, we're not missing anything. Zane and Rollo have cooked up a crazy plan to infiltrate Flashpoint. Rollo brings Zane in as a supposed prisoner, while Griff and Camper hide themselves on the ship. Squint recognizes Zane, and it's clear he isn't quite caught up on current events, specifically the whole framed for murdering all of his friends thing. Before Zane is taken in though, Demigol inspects Jarael, recognizing her as of the Arcanian species, but considers her interesting due to her eyes and pointed ears. At least from a crazy biologist's point of view, there may be more to Jarael than meets the eye. Inside Demigol's lab, Zane and Rollo actually manage to distract Demigol long enough to knock him out and take his armor for Zane to use as a disguise. As they leave though, Jarael attacks them as she believes they've killed Zane, but Zane assures her without blowing his cover with a little nudge from the Force. Outside the station, Zane uses the Force to stick detonators on the Mandalorians' captured ships and control towers right under their noses. Or helmets? The next stage of their plan is for Griff, disguised as a Republic admiral, to detonate the charges while on holocall with the Mandalorians, acting as if the Republic planted them on the ships beforehand as an intentional trap. With the base's shields destroyed, the Mandalorians evacuate before the sun's heat can destroy the station, leaving Zane and Rollo free to rescue the imprisoned Jedi. Using the base's destruction to cover his desertion, Rollo leaves with the real Demigol. Squint asks Zane to come with him and his master to investigate a vision pointing to Zune, the Onderon moon where the previous Mandalore fell 3 decades earlier. Zane declines though, and asks Squint that if he hears anything about Zane when he returns back to the Jedi, to remember what Zane did that day for all the Jedi on Flashpoint. As Squint says his goodbyes to Jarael, he reveals that Squint is actually just a nickname, and tells Jarael that next time she should just call him Alec. Coming back around to issue 9, which acts as an interlude to the Flashpoint story, we see Zane's ex-master and attempted murderer Lucian on Coruscant returning to his old estate, trying to visit his mother. We get flashbacks to Lucian's opulent childhood, where his limited force potential is being tested. We learn that Lucian's mother is a Jedi seer, and his father is a Jedi warrior who died during the Sith War. His mother laments that his force sensitivity doesn't seem to be nearly as strong as either of his parents, and she spends much of her time training the other Padawans at the estate, Jedi who will one day grow up to be part of Lucian's Jedi Covenant. Lucian's cloaked mentor Hazen tells the boy that he will never understand his mother until he understands her mission. In another flashback, we see a young Lucian training with the other 4 Jedi, superior among his peers in lightsaber combat. His mother is furious at Hazen though for allowing such aggressive duels to take place, as the other 4 Jedi are all talented seers that she wants for her own ends. In the present, we see the Jedi Council discussing the ongoing war with Malak's hooded master. The Council rejects their direct involvement in the Mandalorian War, and Lucian tries to comfort them, but the mysterious master simply states that the truth is written in blood and leaves. Lucian meets with the Jedi Council, where he requests that he and his 5 Jedi Covenant lead the search for Zane before he can supposedly gain more Sith knowledge. While the Council does want to search for Zane, they send the 5 Masters off to separate postings, as the Council blames the Padawans' deaths on them even if they don't know the full extent of it. The Covenant refuse to give up their hunt for Zane and are determined to make up lost ground, a philosophy that's known to them as revanchism. In the present, Lucian confronts Hazen at his old estate. His old mentor questions why Lucian didn't bring the Padawans before him and his mother, and inquires about Zane's special relationship with the Force, which before was implied to refer to Zane's incompetence, but now may be signaling something truly special about him. Hazen, invoking his survival during the Sith War, demands that Lucian bring Zane to him instead of killing him, claiming that he and Lucian's mother best know how to deal with the rogue Padawan. Lucian then asks Hazen where his mother is, which Hazen is pretty opaque about. Overall, throughout all of this, we're getting the impression that Lucian's visions and his plot to kill the Padawans runs far deeper into his past and is much more complex than we could have ever expected. Jumping into issue 11, which starts off a new 2-part arc titled Reunion, we see Jarael and Camper in disguise on the planet Telarath, a combined baking planet and vacation resort. The two are there to trick the planet officials into unfreezing Griff's bank account, which was frozen after he got implicated with Zane in his alleged murder spree. Camper claims to be a count whose name is coincidentally very close to Griff's, whose account was frozen by mistake. The manifest with Griff's access codes were actually left on the ship, but amazingly, Camper recites the entire 30-digit access code flawlessly from memory. They finish their dealings successfully, and as the banker escorts Jarael and Camper away, they're ambushed by the Mumo brothers, 2 Ithorian bounty hunters, and though Jarael does a handy job of fighting them off, the 2 brothers manage to kidnap the banker. Zane catches up to the brothers and discovers that the banker is none other than his own father, Arvin Carrick. Moving on to issue 12, the brothers have escaped with Arvin, and we soon discover that the Mumo brothers were hired by Master Marate of the Secret Jedi Covenant to watch Arvin in case Zane went to visit him. However, since they captured him instead of just watching him as ordered, the Jedi Covenant consider them grave failures. As Griff says, the Mumos put the "00 in stupid. Not knowing this, Zane wonders why anyone would want to kidnap his father, and Jarael suggests the obvious, so that someone could get to Zane. They all remark it as an incredible coincidence that they were to luck into Zane's dad themselves before the trap could be properly set, which Zane takes as a sign that maybe the Force really is with him in some strange way. In order to get to the bottom of things, Griff sets his own trap by meeting with one of the brothers and telling them that he'll exchange one Carrick for another, as the bounty on Zane is very high. Zane follows the Mumo brothers to their ship, where Master Tay tells them over hologram that she'll take care of the Arvin Carrick problem once and for all, which effectively lands her at the top of Zane's hit list. Zane frees his dad, who tells Zane that he ended up transferred to Telarath after the news broke about the Padawan murders, and that his banking enterprise was bought out by the Dre Trust, the company owned by Zane's old master Lucian's family. Zane's dad doesn't even ask Zane if he did kill the Padawans because he's absolutely sure that Zane did not do it, and even if he did, it was something he had to do for a good reason, and adds that he's always wanted to watch his son work. With a handy distraction from Camper and Griff, Zane is easily able to escape with his father after a simple cargo box to the head for the Mumo brothers. Safe and sound aboard the last resort, Arvin assures the group that he can still get them the credits from Griff's account. Zane transfers part of the funds to someone on Terrace and encourages his dad to get a new job managing the finances for the Jedi Temple on Dantooine, as Zane believes that's the safest place for his dad and the rest of his family. So I am really liking where this story is headed so far. This volume was, chopped up into some more smaller pieces than I suppose what I'm accustomed to for like a normal trade paperback. But sometimes we're going to have story arcs that are a little shorter, and based on my now increasing experience of reading comics that aren't just Star Wars, it's pretty normal for there to be story arcs lumped into 1 or 2 or 3 issues just as often as there are to be something that'll fill a 5 or 6 issue paperback. And it really didn't kill the pacing or anything like I maybe thought it might. In terms of the 3-issue Flashpoint arc, we learn a lot at a pretty fast clip. It is really great to see immediately how Zane and the crew are going to take on the galaxy and be kind of heroes in their own unique ways. This isn't a noble Jedi character, this is more of like a scoundrel's way of going about things and supporting themselves. And it's interesting to see the Republic from this point of view, because they're raiding these Republic storehouses, but you can't feel bad to the Republic because of how awful they've already been to Zane at this point. So it's a really interesting perspective to see good guy characters acting against the Republic and for the Republic to be the bad guys. It's nice and fresh. The Mandalorians and the nature of their conflict with the Jedi is super interesting to watch unfold and learn more information about. It's really also great to see this war from the perspective of someone like Zane and not someone like Anakin or Luke, who has a really central point in the struggle, at least not yet. Zane is very much boots on the ground, seeing this war from like an outside perspective and only getting roped into it a little bit when it becomes relevant to him. He's not on the front lines of either side. Just trying to survive and avoid trouble is still an interesting thing for a main Star Wars character in a story to do. It just feels like every character from Zane and his crew to Squint to the Mandalorians and like Rollo to even like the Republic officers, everyone's a wild card in this story, and at any point anyone could do something that has huge ramifications to any party, and their allegiances can shift, or they can learn something that's dangerous to Zane. Like just passing by a Republic cruiser is dangerous for Zane, and I really like the way that they've set up the plot, that all of these different things could happen and anything could be dangerous for Zane, and there's just like the setting and the premise has a lot of baked in dangers to make for some really, really good plot. It's just, there's so much room for the protagonists to really put their heads together and to use Griff's grifting expertise to really, really come up with a fun and unique situation for whatever problem they've gotten themselves into. I didn't expect Squint to come back and be important again. He just seemed like a generic kind of disposable friend guy for Zane to have in the first couple of issues to kind of give some exposition, but I'm happy he got thrown into the mix and that we get one more Jedi perspective on the war. And I'm also really interested to know how he's going to react to what Zane did, and I'm just assuming that Squint is going to come back and be important because I like him. Plus, considering what Squint, or Alec with his shaved head, is beginning to look like, and like his red outfit and everything, as well as his master being a mysterious person with no defined appearance or gender, I've definitely caught on to this point what roles these two are going to play in the future of the saga. I'm not going to elaborate on it anymore. I guess technically it's a spoiler, although I imagine most of the people watching this probably know who these two are for one reason or another. But at this point, it's not super relevant to the story of the comics, at least not right this second. It's going to be super interesting to see how these two characters are going to affect the story of the comic and the story of Zane and his friends, and just how their story is going to transition from the comics to the Knights of the Old Republic games. I don't have a whole lot to say about Jerael and Camper. I like them as characters, but it really feels like they're going to get a bigger, more central conflict later on. I don't know what's going on with Jerael and her eyes and her ears. I don't know that much about the Arcanians, except that she looks different than some Arcanians we've seen before. Maybe there's something about her ancestry or her genetic makeup that's going to make her important for some other part of the story later on, but what that is, I can't quite say yet. One thing I must say about Jerael is that she seems to be really comfortable using a Jedi weapon and at least pretending to be a Jedi during missions, and I wonder if maybe Zane will like take her on as his own kind of apprentice, and maybe she will have some kind of latent Force skill that she hasn't tapped into yet. But honestly, I would really hope that Jerael has some kind of journey like that incorporates her becoming kind of like an unorthodox Jedi, being trained by an unorthodox Jedi master. I think that would be super cool. Camper's health health conditions seem to be only getting worse, and I wonder if that is going to be another big crux of the story as well, if they are going to have to deal with Camper's memory getting worse, or if that's going to significantly impact a mission. Maybe Camper has something to do with Jerael's ancestry as well, given he looks similar. I can't say for sure yet, but I hope Camper ends up all right. Rollo is a really fascinating character to throw into the mix here. I don't know off the top of my head if these characters came out, or if these comics came out before or after some of like the major expansions on Mandalorian lore and culture, such as what happened in like Karen Travis's Republic Commando books, which I haven't read yet. But this is chronologically our first really kind of deep exploration into how Mandalorian culture operates and how it affects people who live under it. And it's really great to see that from like a major character who has kind of become disillusioned with that culture and like that hardcore warrior philosophy, and kind of wants to scheme with our heroes to find a way out of it, as opposed to a main character who just like wants to be a part of that culture and doesn't really critique the culture and any of its harmful like tenets. The fact that the Mandalorian solution for deserters isn't to kill them, but to put them directly into the most dangerous battles, basically to test like their fighting resolve, basically to make them fight for their lives and force them to bring out their resolve, is super brutal, but it makes so much sense and it's so cool. I highly doubt this is the last we'll see from Rollo. He brought up too many interesting questions for him to just disappear from the story with a creepy Mandalorian scientist. Yeah, I'm really excited to see where his kind of on the run journey goes, how he'll help Zane, how maybe his allegiances might shift as well, and how he'll maybe grow out of the restraints of his culture. And the questions he did raise about the Mandalorian Wars, particularly why they're starting now, why the Mandalorians are attacking the Republic at all, and the fact that there really aren't any good answers for these yet in universe, I imagine it will be something interesting, some kind of grandiose mystery that will get unpacked as we go along. It's just they're teasing it a lot for it not to be kind of conspiratorial and deep, so I'm interested to see where that goes as well. Also, the idea that Zane like indirectly kickstarted the Mandalorian Wars by making things worse on Terrace. Well, I mean, he didn't, his Jedi Masters did, but you know what I mean. But like the fact that he just embarrassed the Jedi so much that they got kicked out of Terrace, and then Terrace just like went complete to shit, is crazy way to like tie him back to the war and make him kind of a major player in that war. It's like, I wonder if he's going to end up feeling partially responsible and guilty for everything that's going on. And you know, obviously the Jedi doing what they did on Terrace was not great, but like with everything falling apart as soon as they leave is an important reminder of how important the Jedi are as peacekeepers to this galaxy, and like just how bad it is when war makes the Jedi fall apart and lose their way, just like in the Clone Wars. This all kind of reminds me of just a lot of works set in like the High Republic era or towards the end of the High Republic era, like the Living Force and the New Canon, that emphasize just how much the Jedi at certain points in history kind of leave the galaxy to their own devices, and how a lot of the times that makes the galaxy a lot worse when they don't have someone to like step in with some special abilities and really mediate the peace. You know, that emphasize just when the Jedi kind of leave the galaxy out to dry, and when they pull back from planets and people that really need them the most. It really sucks when that happens. Overall, I would just say that if you like this Old Republic era and kind of a lot of the world building that happens in it and how much it emphasizes the role of the Jedi of the galaxy, I would recommend the High Republic era stories. I know some Legends fans kind of seem to not like it because they think it's like a replacement for the Old Republic era, which like it really isn't. And like, oh no, there's gay people in it, scary. But really it does cover a lot of similar ground, and I would highly recommend it if you're looking for like an unexplored place in either canon or Legends that is like a big playground for a lot of these interesting ideas to kind of be covered, and also to investigate like how the Jedi would kind of start their downfall before we see some similar themes be covered in the Clone Wars, and to see the Jedi lose their way by the time of the prequel era. And honestly, the High Republic stuff isn't always my favorite. Honestly, these Knights of the Old Republic comics are doing a lot for me that the High Republic doesn't, but it scratches a similar itch, and I might go finish some of these books after I've done with some of the comics and now that the Acolyte show is over. As for the art of the Flashpoint arc, we have a new penciler this time with Dustin Weaver, and I have to say I really like the way that he draws these characters in the action. His characters are super expressive, and though the style is quite different from Brian Ching's, who I feel is quite iconic for this series, you can still totally tell that this is Zane, and I feel like this style honestly fits Zane specifically and is kind of roguish, like devil-may-care attitude, and I feel like he also just has great expressions when he's in battle or freaking out about something or coming up with some kind of clever plan. Brian Ching's style, like I said, is pretty inseparable in my mind from this series, and I know I said I wasn't the biggest fan of it last time, but honestly I was getting quite used to it. And he is also still a cover artist for this volume, so I'm happy he's still around. And he also did the art for the interlude issue, so it's not like he's going anywhere. All that being said, I just really like what Weaver is doing here with all these characters, and I also really like that the artists seem to be taking turns and collaborating on such a big series, so we kind of get a dynamic look at what a lot of these characters look like in different artists' eyes. And I'm really thankful that we kind of get another look at Zane, because I think this artist does Zane a little better, in my opinion. We do have the same colorists from the last volume though, which means that the colors are very vibrant and they pop and they really suit each environment and they really complement the action with like the explosions and the lasers. This is just a very colorful series. It feels like all the colors in the rainbow are really influencing the way that this comic looks. It's not especially black or brown or dreary. It's like the colors are saturated, but it's not overwhelming. It's just a very vibrant series visually, and I'm really loving the way that it complements kind of the darker nature of the story sometimes. I've never really known a lot about comics and like the production and all the different people that have to work on individual issues before I really started reading a lot of comics for this Star Wars Legends series, so I don't know if all of that sounded like gibberish, but genuinely I love the way that these comics look and the way that the different artists are all collaborating. It's genuinely just making me more interested in the production of comics themselves. That's how interesting I think the way this series looks is. So moving on to the interlude issue with number 9, I was very surprised that there was so much to uncover about Lucian and how deep his conspiracy really went, you know, relating to his mother and the mentor, and even going so far back as the Sith Wars. I was mostly thinking that Zane's masters and their motivations would just be irrelevant for a little while until he goes back and has to defeat them, like much later in the story, probably in like a big rematch. But they've got me hooked on this idea that there's a lot more to learn about why they decided to do all of that with Zane and his friends, and like these dark visions and this conspiracy that seems like it really runs deep, and it's going to continue to shape Zane's story fundamentally for a while. I also think it's super interesting we get a Vodo Syosk Bask mention. Lucian's mother seems to imply that if he had done something about Exar Kun early enough, the Sith Wars would have never happened, which is a crazy thought, and for that to be like a guiding principle of the Jedi Covenant and letting their interpretation of past events shape directly how they're going to handle things in the present, you know, it makes things a little more understandable. It's also great to see some lore connections and some really nice story, like, I don't know what you call this, sinew, cartilage, like, I don't know, I love the connective tissue, there it is, the connective tissue between Tales of the Jedi and Knights of the Old Republic. It's really nice to see, because I love both of these series, even though they are very, very different in tone. You know I've said that sometimes I'm not crazy about Brian Ching's style, but for this issue, I feel like it was really effective. I feel like Zane being a little more expressive and drawn by a different artist works for Zane, but I really cannot see anyone but Brian Ching drawing Lucian with like the hooded eyes and the broad forehead. Like some of these panels are downright haunting, and when Hazen reveals himself to like the reader, Brian Ching, it's pretty good. Like he draws brooding and rage really, really well. So moving on to the last arc, which is the 2-part reunion arc, also drawn by Brian Ching and Harvey Tolibao. I really thought this was a fun couple of issues, but they just did not hold quite as much weight for me. The real star here is Griff. It's always really fun to see him kind of show his chops and come up with some convoluted but super clever and manipulative plan to get him and the others out of trouble. You know, at one point I would have really believed that Griff would have actually sold out Zane for real, but knowing that they are genuinely in this together, and I do think that Griff is really beginning to care about Zane in this point, makes the idea of Griff pretending to sell Zane that much funnier to me. Zane reuniting with his father was not something that I was having on my Knights of the Old Republic bingo card, but seeing that his father not only didn't believe that he committed the murders, but is willing to help Zane out by working undercover at the Jedi Temple is really sweet and is honestly refreshing, considering how many people have tried to screw Zane over at this point. As fun as it is to follow a character who's really unlucky and really has to draw on his wits to survive, it's nice to see that Zane is kind of building more allies that recognize him for his own merit instead of what other people people think he might do. It's just nice to see his luck turn around a little bit and for people to recognize really who he is after such a rough start to his journey. I do find it super interesting in this era that like Jedi are allowed to have so much contact with their families up until I guess they become a Jedi Knight. You know, and we see this from Zane and also from Lucian. Like, your parents can have a very, very significant effect as a Jedi on what your philosophy is. Like, for Lucian, his mother was a Jedi and his father was a Jedi, and that affected his destiny significantly based on what studies his parents decided to undergo as Jedi. You know, it makes sense that the Jedi Order thousands of years before the prequels would operate a lot differently and perhaps be open-minded in a lot of ways. And I almost wonder if in-universe the events of even this specific comic series are going to influence the way that the Jedi are going to operate in the future. Maybe seeing some people like Zane or Lucian, whose families had such a significant upbringing for such controversial Jedi, is going to make them reconsider how much contact the Jedi should have with their parents and how much their parents should influence their children as opposed to just the Order. I don't know if linking those 2 points in time specifically is really in the cards for the series. I don't know if it's going to be addressed directly in that way, but maybe there will be room for a little headcanon that the entire reason that a 9-year-old Anakin couldn't see his mom is because Master Lucian Dre had his entire life messed up because his mom and his mentor were being really weird about some visions. So in conclusion, overall, I had a great time with these 3 little interconnected stories. A bit less of a single self-contained story like Commencement, but that is totally fine. We get some great escalations of stakes and some strengthened emotional connections between all of our characters, but especially with Zane, and just a fantastic growing conflict that continues to change my preconceived notions of where Star Wars can go and where this story specifically is going to go in some pretty good ways. I'm loving the new characters and the dynamics. I'm really enjoying the art so far as well. I'm excited to see how all these story threads are going to keep being introduced and interweave with each other and just get all tied up towards the end. So Knights of the Old Republic Volume 2 Flashpoint is going to get a nice 4.5 out of 5 creepy Mandalorian doctors. Before we go, however, there is one more little piece of media I would like to review, which is a short story written by John Jackson Miller titled Labor Pains that is part of the online Hyperspace collection, which is now archived, and you can find that somewhere. This story is told from the point of view of the not so reliable narrator of Griff as he tries to hustle some fake artwork with Zane on the planet of Raltier, which is going to be the next target for the crew of the Last Resort's escapades. The entire story is marked by Griff's unmistakable voice, and he speaks directly to the reader on a variety of grifting advices, including how to conduct business fast and travel light to stay one step ahead of the authorities, the rationale of targeting planets like Raltier that are full of desperate refugees of the Mandalorian Wars, and the pros and cons of having a wily teenage ex-Jedi as your bodyguard. The target of Griff's next grift is the Obone Gallery of the Industrial Aesthetic, an art gallery curated by Obone the Mune and the mysterious obese Rodian known only as the Father, trying to sell off his industrial statues, which are really just scraps of metal welded together by Camper. Griff tries to pass them off as the authentic works of an artist named Tib Lorette, a name he once saw on a door in Terrace. The curators become convinced that the works actually belong to a real artist named Tickertine, so Griff goes along with it, claiming that he just misspoke the first time. Griff brings in Zane and the statues, and when the curators become skeptical of their authenticity, he convinces Zane to mind trick them into believing that they're genuine, despite Zane's protests that Jedi usually don't really use their powers to rip people off. Griff tells them that they're criminal lowlifes who deserve it though, so it's all good. Griff relies on his own abilities to discuss money, asking for a steep price to try and recoup some expenses of the crew's earlier adventures. Just as Obone begins to doubt the authenticity of Griff and Zane themselves, however, Camper barges in and demands that Griff return his inventions to him. Obone orders his Wookiee bodyguards to kick them all out, but Camper uses one of his invention statues to stun one of the guards and convinces Obone that the art is real, but that Griff and Zane are thieves, which inexplicably makes the works more desirable in Obone's eyes, so he pays them double. The last thing we hear from Griff as they walk back with the money is that when you're running cons with a starry-eyed Jedi that has principles, you have to make a few compromises, but he believes he'll make something out of Zane yet. So overall, this story is pretty funny, and it's always entertaining to see John Jackson Miller just play around with his own characters and just have fun putting them in situations. We get to see a lot of what goes on inside Griff's head and just how much he cares about profit above morals, you know, manipulating Zane into using his Jedi talents in a way that makes him uncomfortable for his own ends, and Griff finds himself having to con even his own friends to get away with his schemes. It's all very in character for Griff, but like so much so that we don't really get any new insights into how he works, and we don't really learn anything new that I think will be super relevant for the story going forward. Beyond that though, it does introduce us kind of briefly to Raltir, which is the next planet that is going to be relevant to the story. But really, I think you can probably skip this story and not miss any important story beats, though if you really love these characters and John Jackson Miller as an author specifically, it's probably worth the extra 5 minutes to skim through. And with that, it seems we finally come to an end to part 20 of the Star Wars Legends review. Next time, we are going to be continuing the Knights of the Old Republic comics with 2 3-issue story arcs in Volume 3, Days of Fear and Nights of Anger. So I hope you all are looking forward to that, and until next time, may the Force be with you, always.